less assumptions than any other sort of setup. Like, you're literally building your own instrument every time you choose which modules to put together in a case. And it encourages you to think really creatively about stuff. You know, there's no fixed architecture. There are a certain set of, you know, kind of common assumptions about which modules would go together in which order. So like you would plug a VCO into a VCA, you would modulate that with an envelope, maybe there'd be a filter somewhere in between, and then you chuck it out to a mixer. But you don't have to do stuff that way. If I want to use my mixer as a CV sequencer, I can do that. You know, if I want to use my filter as a sound source, I can do that. So you can be incredibly creative in terms of how you chain stuff together. But to give you a sense of the basics of how it kind of works, I'm going to run you through two sort of approaches. It's a bit of a simplification, but there's a kind of difference in the modular world between what's called East Coast synthesis and West Coast synthesis. And this is based on like the original assumptions of like the synth inventors in the 60s and 70s. So East Coast would be guys like Robert Moog, who were creating synthesizers that they intended to sort of replace traditional musical instruments with. So they still had all these embedded assumptions about the Western canon, about needing keyboards, about, you know, melodic and rhythmic structure and all this kind of stuff. Which is why if you look at a lot of the early Moog albums, it's stuff like Wendy Carlos doing like Bach on the Moog, you know. On the other hand, like the West Coast synthesis is like Don Buchler, the Surge stuff. These are guys who maybe because they were on the West Coast taking loads of acid in the 60s, they had like very few assumptions about what music was meant to be, and they really wanted to create something totally new that just didn't have any, you know, it wasn't tied to history in any kind of way. So if you look at the early sort of Buchler and Surge stuff, there's no keyboards. The closest you get is this weird kind of like touch plate controller with Buchler. There's traditionally no sequencers with Buchler. They don't use filters in the same way. They don't start with like different waveforms and filter them, and filter all the harmonics and stuff out. They start with really simple waves that they modulate together and do stuff like wave folding with to create really, really interesting timbral qualities. But to start with the East Coast, because it's a little bit easier, traditionally your sound source would be one or more oscillators. So I've got an oscillator here that puts out 4 different waveforms, and the different waveforms just have different harmonics. So you start with a sine wave, which has kind of no harmonics, it's just a single tone. And this is tuned somewhere around C, although tuning on modular equipment is quite a pain. And with analog oscillators, you have to kind of wait for them to warm up, and like the circuitry is a bit kind of wobbly sometimes, and some oscillators tune and stabilize better than others. But the dope for stuff, which is really good entry-level modular synthesis, really well priced, really like well built, yeah, they're pretty stable. Keep pitch on them pretty well. Then you have a triangle wave, slightly different, slightly more harmonics, but you'll hear this as well when we start filtering them. I'm sending my CV in. And I can determine where my CV is coming from. Oh, the reverb is, there's some reverb on this, all the sound you're hearing. It's not totally clean. There's a little guitar pedal that has like a reverb algorithm on it. So now I'm running my envelope into a quantizer, and when I take this quantizer out into my LFO, into my VCO, you should hear something a little bit more melodic than what was happening before. Right now it's just playing a pentatonic. Okay, and I've actually pushed it up a couple of octaves, so let me push it back down.
Music.
Nice.
And this is basically the envelope. So if I change the speed of my envelope again,
So did you say you're quantizing the CV signal to a scale?
Yeah, to a scale.
Yeah. Your envelope going up and down.
Yeah.
So
of the envelope. Okay, very cool.
Yeah, this is the envelope, but I mean I could be using an LFO to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
Or any other module that gives me interesting random voltages. So now something a little bit more complicated is happening, because the first envelope is triggering a second envelope that's looping faster than the first envelope. So together they're causing this weird kind of...
Okay.
So you get some really complex things happening.
To each other.
And of course you can CV all of the parameters of these two envelopes.
Yeah.
So if I now modulate the parameters of this envelope with my sloth, so already you've got something that's kind of like almost repetitive but not quite, and it's a little bit different each time you play it. I could take another channel of my sloth out, attenuate it a little bit, so minimize the signal because you don't want like tons of volts in this instance, but I can use another CV here to transpose my signal. And I also need to be triggering my low pass gate so that every time the quantizer samples the CV going in and chooses a pitch based on how it's quantizing, it also triggers the low pass gate so that things are in time. I'll show you what happens when it's not in time as well. Okay, so here's our original thing again, but now it's running through a low pass gate, so the sound has a definite beginning and end. And I can change the quality of the low pass gate by changing the amount of the length of the gate signal. So now I've got a really short, like couple of millisecond gate.
Modulate that.
I can modulate that. So let's modulate that. Okay, so CV2 is going to be our gate width modulation, and I'm going to take my envelope out to do that. I don't know what it's going to sound like, but let's try it.
There we go.
Now we're talking about
There you go.
Is that a song yet?
Now I just need like 16 more channels and then it's a song. And let's modulate my filter as well. Because I haven't been modulating my filter, which is really bad. So now I've got another sloth modulating the filter. So it's got the semi-cyclical way in which the filter cutoff is going up and down a little bit. But it's always going to be different each time. So it sounds more like a natural instrument or a natural player. I really like these chaos circuits just because of that. Because there's no predictability in them. You know, there's still something that's kind of predictable, but
It's random.
yeah. It feels a bit more natural, like a jammy kind of vibe. So, in terms of like really basic stuff, I mean, that's a basic, what you call a basic synth voice, right? I've got a VCO, which is my sound source in this instance. I'm running it into a gate or a VCA. I'm triggering that with an envelope. There's a filter in between that's controlling the harmonic content, the timbral qualities of the sound. And I'm changing the pitch of the VCO, in this case with the weird semi-random envelope thing, but I could be doing that with a traditional CV sequencer, an LFO, a sequential switch, anything I wanted really. And that's like a single voice patch, that's my little like mono voice analog synth patch. But I mean, of course, depending on like your modular setup, I mean, you could have multiple of these voices going out into your system. I could, if I wanted a little bit of like background to what's happening now, because I've got 4 waveforms happening on my one oscillator, I can take one of the sort of like waveforms with less harmonic content, and I can move it in slightly. So I'm still only using one oscillator, but now I've got 2 sounds out of it. I've got a little bit more like atmosphere and quality out of just this one oscillator. I could take a 3rd waveform out of here. Let me take the square out. And now I'm going to run it into another low pass gate. And then into a delay. And now I'm going to CV this delay. I'm going to CV this 2nd low pass gate kind of randomly. So I don't know what it's going to sound like, but every now and then it'll just trigger it all.
that? Did you?
So this it's a delay that's a little bit out of time, but it's,
Those are the best kinds.
This is a disting. A disting is a really great module. It's one of the first modules I got when I started out because it's a digital module that has about 50 different algorithms on it.
That's what I was
Yeah.
telling you about. That's what
Yeah,
I was trying to look out.
It's really cool because like when you start out, like you don't know what the fuck all the more esoteric modules do. So like I wasn't really clear on what stuff like sample and hold really did when I started and what a comparator was and a full wave rectifier and all this kind of shit. But the disting has all of those, so you can try them all out and figure them all out and then decide based on that, like, oh, these are the things I actually need to build up my system. Like, oh, it'd be nice to have something with a bit of glide, so like let me get a glide module. And
Swiss Army knife.
yeah, it's a Swiss Army knife, and there's some people who will have like a bunch of distings in their rack because like, I mean, it's even got like wavetable VCOs on it, and like you can go wild with it. And really cool effects algorithms. So this is a traditional kind of oscillator, but it also gets really fun when you go for a more West Coast approach. I'm just going to pull these out now. I'm going to pull some of them out. I'm going to... What am I going to do? Fuck.
Reset cables.
So I'm going to multiply my CV now. I'm going to put it into two oscillators simultaneously. And this other oscillator is a through zero oscillator, and you can do really nice frequency modulation if you have these two oscillators together. So I'm going to run the sine wave out of my original oscillator into the frequency modulation of the second oscillator.
There it is.
And of course you would CV all of this as well. And
Yeah. We'll have it on random.
put on random. And there's a really nice, like, what I really like doing personally with this kind of stuff is having this kind of cool interplay between predictable sequence stuff and some sort of subtle random elements just to give it movement over time. I'm really into making generative patches, and that's something really cool about modular stuff is you can literally plug some stuff together that's interacting in non-linear ways, walk away, sit down, and you've got like weird generative ambient music for like as long as you want. So I prefer that to sitting down and doing this regimented like step sequence, like I know exactly what's going to happen next kind of stuff. You can also do that with this, but to me this is like much more, it's got this weird improvisational feel to it. And by subtly tweaking one or two parameters, you can like kill the patch entirely.